Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to yet another version of BLT, Bagels, Love, and Torah, offered by Congregation Micah, virtually. I'm Rabbi Flip, and it is, as always, a blessing to have any and all of you watching as we share some spiritual insights from Parashat Matot Maseh. It's a doubled-up portion this week. Essentially, there are 7 designated Torah portions that, depending on the number of weeks in the year, will be read separately or together. They can be interpreted together or separately. So we like to begin, as always, with a blessing. I say, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So just a short overview. Basically, Parashat Matot presents us with laws. It's the laws given to the Israelites for making vows. Also for the distribution of the booty in war. In fact, there's a description of the Israelites' war of the Midianites is what we get. The Torah also portion concludes with Moses receiving a request by the Gadites and the Reubenites for the lands of Jazer and Gilead. Then we encounter Parashat Maseh, the 40 years of saying, of journeying, we could call the portion journeys, by the Israelites from Egypt to the land of Israel. Moses provides instructions for conquering the land, defending its borders, dividing it up among the tribes. He also defines provisions for setting up 6 cities of refuge, where if you are accused of manslaughter, you can go to one of these cities and be in a safe haven and be ensured a fair trial. The book of Numbers then concludes with a counter-protest regarding the daughters of Zelophehad, which we discussed last week in Parashat Pinchas, and a further clarification of the Torah's laws of inheritance. So that's just an overview. We'll start drilling down on the text next. So we warm up with a little bit of what I like to call brain candy, kind of to get our brains functioning, something to think about. This is called A Dialogue Through Time by Rabbi David Wolpe. There was a time when little changed. People grew up in the same villages as their parents, knew the same people their whole lives and did the same work, ate the same food, heard the same language as their parents, grandparents. Today, we're constantly meeting new people, learning, hearing about new philosophies and ideas, meeting challenges posed by the shifting world around us. History has accelerated, and there's no turning back. Judaism has been struck by the same acceleration. New ideas and new philosophies have flooded this ancient faith. In this bewildering array, is there a bottom line? Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel once wrote an essay he called Toward an Understanding of Halakha. It was subtitled, Jewish Law as a Response. That is the bottom line. If Jewish tradition is a response to God, then it can flourish. If it is an arbitrary melange of customs, it will wither. But although Jews disagree about the history of our tradition, how it came to be and what stages it developed, one idea must endure. Judaism is a dialogue, not a human monologue addressed to an indifferent universe. We are all bound by the mitzvah of relationship, to God, to other human beings, indeed, to all that God has created. And all those relationships are touched by the changes in the world. But in each generation, in each new context, the ancient and blessed conversation, the dialogue that is Judaism, continues. Look, I chose it because this has been a monologue, and it's driving me a little. I wish we could sort of parse out and discuss these texts together. I mean, the whole idea that understanding law is really just a response. Until then, I talk about it with Rabbi Lori, and I prepare us to take a look deeper into the text of the week. Let's take a look. Fascinating, I think. Maybe I'll begin with looking at the text just for a moment and then sort of explaining where I'm coming from. So in Parashat Matot, I'm in verse 2. It says, Vayedaber Moshe el Roshei Hamatot, right there, right? Moses speaks to the Roshei Hamatot, to the heads of the tribes. So the parashat is called Matot, right? This idea of tribes, but he's speaking to the Rosh, like Rosh Hashanah, Bereshit, the first, the head, right? And before I get into it, let me explain that one of the ways the Bible is understood, or interpreted by me at least, we communicate through dialogue. We speak and listen to each other. Right now, I'm talking and you're listening. The rabbi, or the darshan, we would call them, like Drash, the interpreter, searches for words of meaning. Again, what I call candy for your brain, for your soul. So one of my teachers, ever since I was young, was named Rabbi Rami Shapiro, and he teaches that there are two kinds of talk in the Torah, right? There's talk that goes to the Rosh, Rashi, to the head, right? And then there's talk that goes to the heart. And there's a big difference. That's what it is. Our hearts know that divisions in the Torah are basically chosen and not chosen. Let me say that again. Our hearts know that divisions in the Torah, whether they're chosen or not chosen, whether they're pure or impure, whether there's a hierarchy of priests and nations, right? These divisions are a little bit arbitrary. And it's our hearts that know that real divisions and distinctions arise from our actions and our intentions. I'm going to explain. Whether it's good or bad, or loving or fearful, or compassionate or cruel, or justified or undeserved. Distinctions of the head often reflect less the natural order of things than the political nature of things. That's my point. And in this week's Torah portion, it is the political nature of patriarchy and hierarchy. The agenda seems to support an artificial dichotomy between men and women, to which one, only like the head really can acquiesce. Uniquely and quite telling, in this portion that speaks to our heads, we read in this opening verse by Yedaber Moshe, right, that Moses spoke El Rashi Hamatot, to the heads of the tribes, Livnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, Lemor, saying, Zeh hadavar, this is the thing, Asher Tziva Adonai, which God commands. And then it goes on, you can look at the text, and it lists a lot of misogynist stuff. Usually the Torah tells us that God speaks to Moses, telling Moses to speak these words to the people. But here God doesn't say anything at all. Moses simply says that God says this to him. And all we have is Moses' say-so. I'm sure that he's honest. I mean, it's Moses, right? He's the greatest prophet that ever lived. But here, God doesn't say anything at all. Which brings me to a very important element of religion, which we know God can be co-opted. All throughout the book of Numbers, we read of a violent God acting on behalf of a threatened regime. Is this our God? Or the God of the powers that runs the lives of the people of Israel? What I'm suggesting here is not just that the Torah was written by human beings and reflects human foibles, but also that it was edited by people with a political agenda. The book of Leviticus makes it clear. The Levites are the power, and they're the ones that determine who is godly among Israel. And the book of Numbers makes it clear. Moses and Aaron are the power. Their lineage is superior, right? Think back a couple weeks if you've been watching, if you've been reading, you can ask Korach, right? To attack Moses is to attack God. We call that, by the way, today, it's called transference. Transferring divinity from God to the powers that be. I'm not saying that Moses did or did not say any of the things ascribed to him in the Torah. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I am saying is that when he is made to say and do things that are violent, they might reflect the power of the editor who controls the text. Okay. The book of Exodus, right, gave us a Moses who stood up to the powers. The book of Leviticus and Numbers give us a Moses who is the power. And our Torah portion tells us how to keep power. In the book 1984, Huxley makes the point that the easiest people to corrupt are the intellectuals. They fall in line behind anything that seems logical. So the Torah warns us. Don't think only with your head. Think also with your heart. Allow your reason to emote. Because there's two kinds of religion in the world. There's the religion of love and there's a religion of fear. And they both come in a lot of different guises. The followers of the first love differences, right? The followers of the second fear differences. They're not hard to distinguish. The teachings of the heart, they seem to be the same in all faiths. Open your arms, love the stranger. The teaching of the head seem to be the same as of all faith. Circle the wagons, fear the stranger. The great civilizations of the world, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, what have you, they all contain both. Which one are we going to follow? All right. Some opening words, and next we're going to turn to the Torah. Okay, we're going to drill down a little bit. I want to just mention in Parshat Matot that with regard to these tribes, a major lesson in my mind is about caring for yourself and caring for others, which seems really timely during this pandemic. Parshat Matot, what it does is it raises significant moral questions concerning the petitions of the Reubenites and the Gadites to settle this conquered lands of Jazer and Gilead. And the reason is because it's on the east side of the Jordan River. Also quite timely as we think about Israel and the political and potential moves it makes to enlarge its estate. The tribal leaders approaching the aging Moses, Eleazar the priest, and the other heads of the community during the crucial months preceding the battle for the land of Israel. And they explain that the area of Jazer and Gilead is cattle country, and they're ranchers. They have cattle. Favor us, they say, by giving us this land. Do not move us across the Jordan. And Moses is just infuriated by their request, sensing betrayal. He tells them in anger, are your brothers to go to war while you stay here? Why will you turn the minds of the Israelites from crossing into the land that Adonai has given them? Pausing, he continues by accusing them of the same sort of treason practiced by their ancestors. That is what your fathers did when I sent them Kadesh Barnea, right, to survey the land. They went up into that valley of Eshcol, and they surveyed the land, and they turned the minds of the Israelites from invading the land that Adonai had given them, right? Now you, a breed of sinful men, have replaced your fathers. So it's a stinging denunciation. But the Reubenites and Gadites hold their ground. Responding to Moses' charge, they request only enough time to build sheepfolds for their flocks and towns for their children. Afterwards, they're willing to serve in the vanguard of the Israel's battle for the land and remain until every one of the Israelites is in possession of his portion. They also assure Moses that they will make no claim of any land west of the Jordan River. So Moses accepts their promise, warns them against breaking it, and tells them, build towns for your children and sheepfolds for your flocks, but do what you have promised. Criticizing the request of the Gadites and Reubenites, again, the early rabbis comment on their explicit greed and link them to Korach, actually, and Goliath and Balaam, who acted unscrupulously to accumulate their wealth, and then only really to lose it. They argue that the petition brought before Moses by the Gadites and Reubenites is self-serving. It is the work of people who love their money and are willing to sacrifice the welfare of their people to protect their own narrow interests. In fact, the rabbis even go so far as to say they separate themselves from their people because of their concern for possessions. And drawing a parallel between the Gadites and the Reubenites to Balaam and Goliath and Korach, right, rabbinic interpreters suggest that they all suffered defeat for the same reason. They snatched their wealth by using strength and power and manipulation, devious means. They're out for themselves. They're inconsiderate of others. And they'll use any means to increase their profits, their riches. Their wealth is temporary, say the rabbis. It goes as quickly as it comes because it's not a gift of God. And because of their greed, they lose it all within 2 centuries when they are exiled by the invading troops of Assyria. So knowing this history, the rabbis' charge goes even further. They point out that the Gadites and Reubenites prove how foolish they were by their priorities. When Moses criticized them for seeking land on the east side of the Jordan River before they have helped conquer the land of Israel, they answer, "We will build here sheepfolds for our flocks and towns for our children." Their response, claim the rabbis, reveals their priorities. Rather than speaking first about towns for their children and families, they emphasize building sheepfolds for their flocks. They show greater concern for their cattle than for human beings. More attention to their possessions than their own flesh and blood. Moses then concludes, is fully justified in denouncing them. Jewish historian Josephus Flavius, who lived during the 1st century of the Common Era, argues with his harsh rabbinic assessment of the Gadites and Reubenites. Moses, he writes, understands that they're seeking a strategy for securing their wealth on the east side of the Jordan River, not participating in the Jewish people's conquest of their land. And for that reason, he's justified, he argues Josephus, in labeling them arrogant cowards because they had a mindset to live in luxury and ease, while the rest were sort of laboring with great pains to obtain the land they were desirous to have. Josephus condemns them for pursuing self-interest and neglecting responsibility to the common good of the people. Wear the masks. Modern commentator Pinchas Pelly agrees, claiming that the Gadites and the Reubenites represent a serious separatist threat to the Jewish people. Moses' concern, Pelly writes, quote, was with the ethical implications of the seceding of the 2 tribes from a war that could be fought by all of Israel. The conquest of Eretz Israel was not incumbent only on those who planned to live on the land. It was, in the eyes of Moses, the culmination of the drama redemption that should be acted out in by all the tribes that came out of Egypt. According to Pelly, however, Moses also worries about the effect that step taken by Reuben and Gad might have had on the morale of the people. He scolds them with a harsh language, calling them a brood of sinful men, and links them to the slanderous spies who reports were designed to frighten an earlier generation from going up to conquer the land of Israel. Their request to remain on the east side of the Jordan River undermines the unity of the people, and it threatens to deplete their strength just when it's required the most. So Moses, says Pili, understands the divided people will not be victorious over its enemies, and their request is nonetheless nothing less than treason. And for that reason, he severely reprimands them. Nachmanides, another commentary, sympathizes with Moses' suspicion of the Gadites and Reubenites, but maintains that their true intentions are misunderstood. Moses, he writes, is guilty of overreaction. He then patiently, rather than patiently hearing them out, he rushes to condemn them. He suspects they are only suggesting that they stay on the east side of the Jordan because they are afraid of the people in the land of Canaan, and that's not the actual reason. That explains, says Nachmanides, why Moses accuses them of a failure of nerve and acting like their ancestors who, out of fear, spread lies that the people inhabiting the land were giants and would overwhelm the Israelites in battle. You see, Nachmanides is critical of Moses. He points out that the intentions of the Gadites and the Reubenites was never to abandon the effort to conquer the land, but to enlarge the inheritance of the tribes by settling in desirable lands east of the Jordan River. In justifying his observation, Nachmanides quotes them as telling Moses, "We will hasten as shock troops in the van of the Israelites until we have established them in their home, nor will we claim any share with them on the other side of the Jordan beyond having received our share on the east side of the Jordan." I'm reading from chapter 32, by the way, verses 17 through 19. Then Nachmanides' argument is that the Gadites and Reubenites came before Moses with a request, not a confrontation. They were seeking not only what was best for them, but also what they believed was best for all the Israelites. Their plan would have given people more, not less land. And had Moses taken the time to hear them out instead of instantly condemning them, their intentions would have been clear. Another good lesson in listening to each other in this tumultuous time. Abravanel agrees with Maimonides and probes for an explanation of Moses' confusion and indigent response. What accounts, he asks, for Moses' immediate and angry answer to the Gadites and Reubenites' request to settle their families and cattle east of the Jordan River? He discovers an explanation. In the first words, they speak to the aging leader. They say to him, "It would be a favor to us if this land were given to your servants as a holding. Do not move us across the Jordan." This is Numbers 32:5. Their mistake, says Abravanel, is in putting the matter of their crossing the Jordan in negative terms. In doing so, they confuse Moses, leading him to assume that they fear the battle ahead and are seeking a way to avoid helping conquer the land of Israel. Had they simply said, "We are ready to join in conquering the land and will be satisfied if you allow us to inherit this land east of the Jordan," Moses would not have misunderstood their motive. Their fault was in the carelessness of their presentation, in the thoughtlessness of their words. Abravanel's contemporary, Isaac Arama, believes that Moses should have apologized for his hasty, false assumptions about the Gadites and Reubenites. However, he argues that the motives were deeply divided and thus confused Moses. On the one hand, they were ready to fight along the side of the Israelites. On the other hand, they would have been pleased to be excluded and allowed to remain east of the Jordan with their families. They alternated with ambivalence between loyalty to the people and a willingness to forego their tribal inheritance in the land of Israel. They knew that their people's destination for 40 years was to inherit and live in the land of Israel, but they also wished to stay abroad because they had found territory that suited their cattle, as if they had come to this destination to accommodate their animals with choice pasture. This serious confusion about their motives accounts for the ambivalence Moses senses in their request, leading him to accuse them of treason. Their own lack of clarity about their goals and their destination leaves them incapable of articulating a destination, a direction. They become prisoners of their own ambivalence, unable to determine what they want because they do not know what they want. Little wonder that Moses did not comprehend their true intentions. They may not have. The Reubenites and Gadites understood it at all. So, in contrast to the explanations of Abravanel and Arama, Rabbi Moshe ben Chaim Alskeh, we've discussed him before, excuses the Gadites and Reubenites' request, arguing that it was motivated by generosity and realism, not by confusion. He points out that Gad and Reuben seek to convince the tribal leaders that their choice, everybody will win and everyone will have more land. The reason they stress that they would first build enclosures for their cattle and then provide for their children is to convince Moses that the safety of their children is not their primary concern. Their first priority is to benefit all people. Supporting his argument, he writes, quote, "When Moses realizes that the intention of these tribes has been sound, that they have only erred in their semantics, having been imprecise in the use of language, he instructs Eleazar and Joshua that they should not be harassed for their decision to ultimately reside east of the Jordan River." As with Abravanel, Alsek identifies the problem as one of semantics. However, rather than blaming the Gadites and Reubenites for carelessness and confusion of goals, he dismisses the matter, saying that once Moses understands the true intention of their request, he accepts the fair-mindedness of the Reubenites and Gadites and that his suspicions had not been based on fact. The differing views over the motives of the Gadites and Reubenites in asking to inherit the lands east of the Jordan River and to remain them until they built enclosures for their cattle and cities for their children raises significant moral questions about really the divisions of responsibilities to oneself, to one's family, to one's community, and larger country maybe. The clash of Moses with the Gadianites and the Reubenites over interests and intentions is common. It continues. It's why the great Hillel has the three sort of questions that we're supposed to ask. That is, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? So Moses being criticized is interesting. Our sages declare that Moses, offends God by describing the Israelites as a band of sinners, and was actually punished accordingly, right? And that one of his descendants became a priest to heathen worship. It teaches us, if someone has a quarrel with another person, that person should not in anger insult the ancestors of that person. There even exists an ancient ban against speaking ill of those who are already sleeping in the ground, even when there are justified reasons for doing so. And finally, another reason this controversy continues, there's a Rabbi Simcha Zissel of Chelm, the petition of these 2.5 tribes to not cross the Jordan because of cattle. He says it actually boils down for the desire for money. It doesn't take a great flight of the imagination to relate the cattle and grazing of those lands to the cattle and grazing of lands today. Why do Jews continue to live outside of Israel, on the other side of the Jordan, on the other side of the Atlantic? Because we found pretty good grazing for our cattle. Why would we give it up? But even if the descendants of God in Manasseh petitioned someone today about their choices, we could very well assume that Moses would say today what he might have said then. Why should your brothers go out and fight while you stay here? An Israeli point of view. Like I said, the controversy continues. Let's maybe take a look at the cities of refuge next. And I thank you again for joining us. So this whole idea of cities of refuge, like justice for unintentional homicide, it's a revolutionary approach, I think, to really providing justice to anyone who is committed involuntary manslaughter, meaning that they've unintentionally killed another person. And it suggests that in such accidents, guilty parties can escape avenging relatives by going immediately to one of these 6 Arei Miklat, they're cities of asylum. And within those cities, 3 of which are located in the land of Israel, Hebron, Shechem, and Kadesh. And 3 are east of the Jordan River, actually, Bezer, Ramoth, and Golan. And those who have committed involuntary manslaughter are to find safety and justice for those seeking to avenge the death of their loved ones. So how do these cities of asylum function, really? The Torah and rabbinic law provide us with some answers. During the biblical period, relatives of murder victims, whether premeditated or unintentional, had the right to find and execute those who were guilty of killing their loved ones. And those whose crime was committed by accident, however, had the right to save themselves from the avenge of families by going immediately to one of these 6 cities. All roads leading to these cities had to be clearly marked with signs pointing the way. It's not like they were secret cities. And the roads were to be straight, level, and in good condition so people could get there. No obstacle really was to stand in the way of those seeking asylum. Upon arrival at the city gate, unintentional murderers presented themselves to elders of the city who essentially offered them hospitality. Once rested, they were taken to court where it was determined whether they were guilty of premeditated murder or involuntary manslaughter. If they were judged guilty of premeditated murder, they were put to death. If guilty of unintentional homicide, they were allowed to live rent and tax-free in the refuge city during the lifetime of the incumbent high priest. You got to hope that that was a younger person. After the death of the high priest, they could return to their home cities without fearing harm from avengers. I don't know why or how, but this is what is sort of parsed out. And the text that this commentary points to is from Numbers 35, verses 9 through 34. And we also see it mentioned in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 33, and in chapter 19, verses 8 and 10. Modern commentator, Rabbi Gunther Plaut, speculates that the institutionalization of such asylum may be the earliest of its kind. And he points out that the distinguishing features of the biblical provisions are the restriction of asylum to the unintentional slayer and the connection of the institution with the death of the high priest. Essentially, Plaut claims that the notion of the cities of asylum came or arose out of the need to end family feuds by taking the process of law out of the hands of private individuals and essentially emphasizing the role of public law enforcement. So for Plaut, the Arei Miklat, they serve three different purposes. They are meant to protect unintentional murderers from the passions of avengers and to punish them, and to contain and isolate the sin that has been committed. He suggests that the isolation of the sin is the most important, explaining that the killing of a human being, though it occurred without evil intent, was a moral injury to the total community, because the people of Israel have a special relationship that was founded on a zealous regard for the sanctity of every life. Rabbi Jacob ben Isaac Ashkenazi of Yanov, author of Tetzena Ve'Re'ena, supports Plaut's view, maintaining that the Arei Miklat are a means of containing the sin of murder. He writes that each murder, intentional or unintentional, banishes God's presence from the world because each human being is made in the image of God. And when that image is destroyed, part of God's presence is sent into exile. By contrast, the high priest, through his sanctity function in the sanctuary, brings God's presence into the world. And this is why, according to this Rabbi Jacob, the unintentional killer is confined to the city of asylum until the high priest dies. Those who diminish God's presence should not go into the world, should not contaminate it with their sin, while the high priest who labors to bring God's presence into the world is alive. Our friend Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch amplifies the point that Rabbi Plaut makes, and that Rabbi Jacob is concerned with, regarding this sacredness of life, by emphasizing the special relationship with the people, the land of Israel, and God. He writes, quote, "The land is only given on the condition that every human life be respected and being unassailably sacred to the Torah." So read that to some modern Israelis. "One drop of innocent bloodshed and no notice taken of its drops, a stitch in the bond that connects the land with the nation and both with God." Now, unlike Plaut and Jacob, Hirsch does not look upon the asylum cities as places for the containment of those who contaminate the world, though through their sin of unintentional homicide. Instead, he sees them as providing opportunities offering forgiveness and rebirth. Hirsch argues that just as when we are born, we are, quote, set in the world as a permanent surrounding, consigning the unintentional murder to a Miklat city is similarly a second confining birth. The Miklat city is henceforth the whole world to the one who relegated to it. All right, according to Hirsch, this rebirth within the sort of Miklat, within the city, is not a form of punishment. It's a chance to find a life. For Hirsch, right, the town should be like of medium size, not enclosed by a wall, provided water and food markets. All national classes have to be settled there. It has to have teachers. It has to have students, people of science. It has to have spiritual and intellectual qualities to it. According to Jewish tradition, students must be allowed to follow their teacher if he is guilty of unintentional murder, and a teacher must be given the freedom to follow a student. All right. Quoting from the description of Arei Miklat in Deuteronomy 19:5, Hirsch emphasizes that unintentional murderers are, quote, to flee to one of these cities and live, and for that reason, these cities are to be environments for rebirth, nurturing places where human beings can enjoy the company of others, pursue their talents, and grow both spiritually and intellectually, despite the fact that the manslayer is confined to such cities until the death of the high priest. They are not prisons, is what he's arguing. They must form, concludes Hirsch, a complete world on a small scale. This is found on a commentary to Numbers 35, verses 6 through 12. Medieval commentator Aharon Halevi does not agree with Hirsch's point of view, stressing that asylum cities are meant as punishment places for those who cause the death of others. He writes, quote, there for those who cause death of others, their crime is great because it corrupts the entire world. Yeah, it's a similar notion. Our teachers say that a person who commits a premeditated murder will not be saved from death, even though he may have observed all the other commandments of the Torah. Therefore, a person who has unintentionally caused the death of another deserves the punishment of exile because he has been the agent for a terrible accident. This punishment of exile is compared to the death in a social sense because he's separated from his loved ones and home. He's sent to live among strangers. Who right now is not feeling a little bit is in a sense of exile, a social sense of death. Yeah, not that we did anything wrong. Halevi's view reflects the opinion of some early rabbis who compare the exile of Adam in Garden of Eden to the exile of the unintentional murderer to the one in the Arai Miklat cities, right? Yet the punishment is mixed with compassion. Here it is. The rabbis point out that Adam ate from the tree of knowledge of good and bad, even though he'd been told, in the day that you eat from that tree, you will die. Yet God did not put him to death. Instead, say the rabbis, God demonstrates compassion and expels him from the Garden of Eden. The lesson to be learned here is that human beings are to show compassion, especially upon the fate of one who commits murder, in error by accident. Such a person is to be protected from avengers and exiled from his home to one of these cities of refuge. And you're establishing for these people a resting place on the direct roads leading to them. And at each resting place, it says, along the way, there are to be signs reading to the cities of asylum. So similar notion here in Numbers Rabbah. Everybody needs to know how to get there, and you got to be able to get there safely. Rabbi Yitzhak Magriso, author of Me'am La'oz, also stresses the compassion shown by Jewish tradition toward the unintentional murderer in creating these cities. Their purpose, he maintains, is to prevent the blood avenger from killing him. And he adds that the reason given for the killer having to stay in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest is that relatives of the murdered person would then relent. By mourning for the death of a great person, their own anguish would cool, since they would come to realize that all human beings die sooner or later, even the greatest of their generation. Rabbi Magriso recognizes the apparent inequity in connecting liberation from the city of all refuge to the death of the high priest. After all, one unintentional murderer might be confined to the city of asylum for many years, while another might be required to stay for no more than a day should the high priest die just after his assignment to the city of the court. Such disparity in the length of sentences raises questions about the fairness of linking them to the life of the high priest. Members of a grieving family whose loved one has just been killed could ask, what kind of justice is that? And the answer, according to Rabbi Magriso, is that while there are no scales for measuring which willful murder is more terrible and which is less terrible, in the case of unintentional killings, there are differences. There may be an inadvertent killing that is close to deliberate murder. For instance, when someone kills another while chopping wood, if he looked about him, he would have seen the man standing there and he wouldn't have hit him. By carelessly swinging the axe to split the wood, he hit the man in the head and killed him. On the other hand, if the victim was far away and the metal part of the axe flew out of the other's hand and killed him, his guilt is less. In fact, the killing is considered entirely inadvertent. God knows the relative guilt of such inadvertent killings. Accordingly, if one killed another accidentally, this could take place close to the high priest's death, and his punishment would be correspondingly light. Wow! If it was close to a deliberate killing, it would take a long time before the high priest died, and the killer's punishment would be correspondingly harsh. All right, clearly Rabbi Magriso here is establishing the principle that because the accidental death has a variety of causes, some through carelessness, others through, coincidence, The release from the punishment ought to be based upon fate as well. The death of the high priest presents such a happenstance because no one knows when the high priest is going to die. The timing is imprecise. It can almost be considered God's will. For that reason, the timing of release from one of these cities, no matter how close or far from the sentence, shouldn't really be questioned. Don Isaac Abravanel provides a more psychological explanation of the link between the high priest's death and the end of the exile in the cities. He points out that when the high priest died, the entire people trembled and repented for their sins. This sense of sorrow was great. So was the feeling that the uncertainties of life. We all feel that now. It could therefore be assumed, he explains, that the avenger of a person accidentally killed would, under the sad circumstances of the high priest's death, reconsider his anger, calm himself, no longer seek to execute vengeance for the killing of a member of his family. So while some interpreters claim that the Arei Miklat are set aside as places of punishment, or as a means of containing the sin of murder from spreading throughout the society, most Jewish teachers actually stress that they're meant to save the person who has committed unintentional murder from death by individuals who might take their law into their own hands, provide a place where such a person can... Sorry, we got cut off there. I just want to finish about this idea and really leave you with a question in the end, and that is, with regard to the requests of the Gadites and the Reubenites, is our loyalty to our family or to our people? And most importantly, are there times when we have to put aside self-interest for the good of our nation? And isn't this one of those times? Wear the mask. I want to share an interpretation by Rabbi Laura Geller of the following text from Numbers 30, verses 4 through 6, which reads, "If a woman makes a vow to the Eternal or assumes an obligation while still in her father's household by reason of her youth, and her father learns of her vow or her self-imposed obligation and offers no objections, all her vows shall stand, and every self-imposed obligation shall stand. But if her father restrains her on the day he finds out, none of her vows or self-imposed obligations shall stand, and the Eternal will forgive her since her father restrained her." So Rabbi Geller writes, "Some time ago I received an email with the subject line, 'The Arab Mentality.' It described a Palestinian woman who'd been badly burned and successfully treated in Israel, only to be later arrested for attempting to infiltrate Israel's borders as a suicide bomber. The sender included the names of all those who'd received the posting, and my name was in the middle of the list. As I often do when I receive emails like this, I consulted with the Anti-Defamation League, the principal American Jewish organization that fights anti-Semitism and bigotry, to see whether the story was true, and indeed, it was. But I was still uncomfortable with the email. I believe that labeling this posting the Arab mentality was like an anti-Semite tilting a posting about Bernie Madoff, the Jewish mentality. No question that this particular woman was a terrorist, but to suggest that her actions described the mentality of an entire group of people, the Arabs, struck me as clearly wrong. I get a lot of emails like this, emails describing situations, sometimes true and often not true, that slander Arabs and Muslims as a group. I'm never sure how to respond. The easiest thing to do is simply delete them. But if I just deleted the message, what was I saying about my silence? Other congregants were on the same response list. They knew I had seen it too. This Torah portion is part of why I felt I had to respond. Matot begins with a description of important vows. The primary focus is the vows that women make. As the Torah, a women's commentary suggests, quote, "The chief concern seems to be to regulate the impact that a woman's vow might have upon the household, her father, or her husband." In a patriarchal culture, this would not be surprising, right? Her father and husband can veto her vows. What is surprising is that the veto has to happen on the day that he finds out about it. The Shulchan Aruch, the classic code of Jewish law written in the 16th century by Maimonides, makes it very clear. They can only cancel the vow within the day they heard it. That is, if they heard the vow at the beginning of the evening, they may cancel it all night and the entire following day. If they heard the vow close to the time that the stars appear, they can cancel it only until the stars appear. Beyond that time, they cannot cancel it. Rabbi Bradley Artson points out, this is strange because If these fathers and husbands have the power to veto the woman's vow, why does it have to be immediate? Here's the Talmud's answer. Silence is like consent. Yevamot 88a. Once you know that a promise is, if you don't speak up, it's as though you're responsible for it. Once you know what's going on, if you don't speak up, you're responsible for it. Someone finds a derogatory email that tarnishes all Arabs and I say nothing, silence is like consent. Maharal of Prague, a 16th century scholar, made this very clear when he wrote that every individual piety is not enough. No matter how pious we are, we will be held accountable for the sin of not protesting against something that is wrong. His position has echoes in the Talmud. Whoever has the ability to prevent his household from sin and does not accountable for the sin of his household. If he could do so with his fellow citizens and does not, he's accountable for his fellow citizens. And if for the whole world, he is accountable for the whole world. Shabbat 54b. So, maybe I can't prevent the whole world from sin or my community or even my family. But if I do nothing, then I'm accountable. So back to the email dilemma. This is how I responded. I'm not sure that sharing emails like this is necessarily helpful in the ongoing discussion of what is best for Israel. This is not a story about the Arab mentality in general. It's rather a story of a particular Arab woman. This issue comes up in so many different ways. How often does a picture appear on your Facebook page that makes you fun of someone you know? How often are you in a chain of cyberbullying? How often does someone share gossip and humiliate someone else you know? This week's Torah portion asks us to be careful about what we say, the vows and the promises we make, and it also demands of us to be careful about what we don't say, because, quote, silence is consent. A poignant piece with all that's going on in our country as of now. I'll see you one more time. We'll conclude with some Haftarah. There is no connection between the Torah and the Haftarah. That is, it is the second of the three Haftarot that are usually read between the seventh day of Tammuz, when the Babylonians breached the city walls, and the 9th of Av, when they razed the temple. So all three deal with the punishment that will be meted out to a people that forgets God and the covenant, and are known by tradition by the Aramaic name Salat de Fur Anuta, the three Haftarot of affliction. Our setting here is Josiah, king of Judah in the last quarter of the 7th century before the Common Era, when the struggle between Egypt and Assyria is climbing and the two contending superpowers of the Near East was nearing its climax. The northern kingdom, Israel, as its capital, Samaria had already been destroyed and the inhabitants deported. Now it's the southern kingdom, Judah, Jerusalem is his capital, that is in mortal danger. A danger that Jeremiah understood to be due more to spiritual, really, than to political failures. We cannot tell at what a stage of his life the prophet delivered this message or these warnings, but many scholars believe that it was during the earlier part of his ministry, a time when he became disenchanted with the effectiveness of Josiah's reforms. I'm reading from Jeremiah chapter 2, verses 4 to 28, and there's also an addition of chapter 3, verse 4. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'miyim tovim ratah b'divreihem hane'emarim be'emet Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'torah u'Moshe ado u'Yisrael amo u'v'ndiei ha'emet v'tzedek. Hear the word of the Eternal, O house of Jacob, and all the clans of the house of Israel. Thus says the Eternal One, what wrong did your ancestors find in me? That they moved away from me? That they went after empty things and themselves became empty? They never said, where is the Eternal who brought us up from the land of Egypt, who led us in the wilderness, a land of desert and pits, a land of drought and darkness, a land that none has crossed, where no one has lived? I brought you to a fruitful land, to enjoy its bountiful fruit, but you came and defiled my land. You turned my heritage into an abomination, and the priests did not say, where is the Eternal? Those who should take hold of the Torah did not know me. The secular rulers rebelled against me, like the prophets who prophesied in the name of Baal and followed things that have no use. Therefore, I will go on accusing you, says the Eternal One, and I will accuse your children's children. Cross over to Cyprus and see. Send Kedar and consider well. See, was there ever the like? Has a nation ever exchanged its gods, even though there were unreal gods? Yet my people has exchanged its glory for what has no use. You heavens shake with horror at this. Bristle with horror. Be stunned, says the Eternal One, for my people have done a terrible wrong, a double wrong. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and have hewn for themselves cisterns, cracked cisterns that cannot hold water. Is Israel a slave, a homeborn serf? If not, why has he become a prey over which lions roar, growling aloud, making the land desolate, their towns unpeopled ruins? The people of Memphis and Talphines will break your head. Did you not bring this on yourselves by forsaking the eternal your God while God led you on your way? Now then, what good will it do to go to Egypt to drink the waters of the Nile? And what good will it do to you to go to Assyria to drink the waters of the Euphrates? Your own wickedness rebukes you, and your betrayals reprove you. Know and see how bad it is and bitter to forsake the eternal your God, to hold me in awe no more, says the Eternal One, God of heaven's hosts. For long ago I broke your yoke, shattered your bonds. And you said, I will not transgress. Yet now on every high hill, under every leafy tree, you lie sprawling as a harlot. I planted you a choice vine with the right kind of seed. How putrid you've become, so strange a vine. Though you wash yourself with lye and use more and more soap, the stain of your guilt remains before me, says the Eternal God. How can you say I am not defiled? I have not gone after the Baalim. Look at your way into the valley. Know what you have done. You are a young camel running wild, a wild ass, used to the desert, eagerly snuffing the breeze at rutting time. Who can restrain her? Those who are after her never grow tired. In her mating season, they'll easily find her. Keep your feet from going bare and your throat from thirst. But it's no use, you say. I have loved strange gods, and after them I must go. Like a thief, found out and disgraced, so is the house of Israel disgraced. All of them, their kings and leaders, their priests and prophets. All who call wood my father and say to stone, you gave birth to me. And they turn their backs to me, not their faces. Then in their hour of trouble they say, rise up and save us. And where are your gods that you have made for yourselves? Let them rise up and save you in your hour of trouble. Judah, you have as many gods as you have towns. And yet, not long ago you cried out to me, my father, friend of my youth. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam tzur kol haolamim tzadik b'kol hadorot ha'el ha'ne'emahan ha'omer ve'oseh ha'medaber u'mekayem shachol devaraha ve'mepat tzedek al ha'torah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al ha'nevim ve'al yom ha'shabbat hazeh shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu likdusha v'limnucha lechavod u'tifaret. Al hakol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu monim lach hamevarachim otach yitparak shimcha befi kol chai tamid leolam ba'echad baruch atah Adonai mekadesh hashabbat. Until we meet again, virtually or in person, have a good Shabbos.